Toxic relationships don't just harm your emotional well-being, they can also pull you away from God's will. The story of Ahab and Jezebel shows how manipulation can quietly take root, influencing decisions and leading to destruction. Jezebel's control over Ahab allowed sin to flourish, causing personal ruin and spiritual decay across a nation. This isn't just a story from the past. It's a warning for us today. In relationships, manipulation and control can often disguise themselves as care, loyalty, or necessity. Left unchecked, they can lead to guilt, compromise, and isolation from God's truth. But when we recognize manipulation for what it is, we can respond with wisdom, set healthy boundaries, and stay aligned with God's will. In today's message, we'll break down the dynamic between Ahab and Jezebel to uncover the signs of toxic relationships. Most importantly, we'll explore how you can take practical steps through reflection, setting boundaries, and seeking godly counsel to avoid falling into these dangerous dynamics. No matter what you've experienced in the past, God offers a way forward, and it starts with recognizing unhealthy patterns and making intentional changes. Let's dive in. The dangerous dynamic between Ahab and Jezebel reveals how manipulation and control can lead to personal destruction and spiritual decay. As king of Israel, Ahab was called to follow God's commands and lead his people with righteousness. However, instead of standing firm in his role, Ahab allowed Jezebel's influence to shape his decisions, pulling him further away from God's will. A vivid example of this manipulation is the story of Naboth's vineyard, found in 1 Kings 21. Ahab coveted Naboth's land, but when Naboth refused to sell it, honoring God's law, Ahab retreated into frustration and passivity. Seeing an opportunity to exert her control, Jezebel stepped in, scheming to have Naboth falsely accused and executed, taking the vineyard by force. Ahab, instead of resisting this injustice, accepted the stolen vineyard without question. This incident reveals the dangerous nature of manipulation. It grows stronger when responsibility is avoided and decisions are driven by selfish desires. Toxic relationships follow a similar pattern. Manipulators often thrive when one party avoids conflict or responsibility, leaving space for control to take root. Ahab's passivity enabled Jezebel's manipulation to flourish unchecked, not only damaging his own life, but also leading an entire nation into sin through idol worship and injustice. When boundaries are not set, unhealthy behavior gains momentum, and the line between right and wrong begins to blur. Avoiding responsibility may seem like the easier path, keeping peace, avoiding arguments, and maintaining appearances. But in reality, avoidance enables toxic behavior to grow, creating deeper patterns of manipulation. This is why it's essential to take a hard look at your own role in relationships. Are you avoiding difficult conversations to keep the peace? Are there warning signs you've chosen to ignore out of fear of conflict or rejection? It's easy to think that by staying silent, you're minimizing harm, but silence often allows unhealthy patterns to thrive. Taking responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself. It means becoming aware. Ask God to reveal areas where you may have enabled unhealthy behavior, even unintentionally. This type of reflection takes courage but brings clarity, allowing you to recognize dynamics that may have gone unchecked for too long. As James 1 verse 5 teaches, God offers wisdom to those who seek it, and with that wisdom comes the ability to set boundaries that honor Him. Confronting these issues can feel overwhelming, especially if you've grown accustomed to avoiding them. But Ephesians 4 verse 15 reminds us that God calls us to live in truth and love, which sometimes requires difficult conversations and setting boundaries. You don't need to fix everything at once. Start small, identify one conversation or boundary that needs to happen, and ask God for the courage to take that step. Even small acts of faith can bring peace and freedom, helping you realign your relationships with God's truth. Toxic relationships thrive when responsibility is avoided, creating space for manipulation to take root. Reflecting on your role helps you identify areas where change is needed, allowing you to move toward healthier boundaries and God-centered relationships. Here's how to recognize manipulation and control. Manipulation can be hard to recognize because it often disguises itself as care, concern, or loyalty. Jezebel's tactics in her relationship with Ahab show how manipulation works subtly at first, but over time, it gains momentum, steering decisions and actions away from God's truth. Recognizing these patterns is essential if you want to break free from unhealthy dynamics. Manipulators often use emotional control, leveraging guilt, fear, or frustration to get their way. In Jezebel's case, she manipulated Ahab's emotions, exploiting his disappointment over Naboth's refusal to sell the vineyard. Rather than encouraging Ahab to handle the situation with integrity, she took control by orchestrating a scheme to achieve her goal through deceit. In the same way, manipulative behavior in relationships today can manifest as someone making you feel responsible for their emotions or pressuring you to act against your values. Another common tactic of manipulation is discouraging spiritual growth or community. Jezebel promoted idol worship throughout Israel, deliberately pulling Ahab and the nation away from God. Similarly, toxic relationships can lead you away from prayer, scripture, and godly relationships by minimizing their importance or creating subtle barriers. If a relationship isolates you from God or causes you to compromise your faith, it's a clear sign of manipulation at work. Manipulators also foster dependence through fear, creating an environment where you feel incapable of acting without their input or approval. This fear can take many forms: fear of rejection, conflict, or losing the relationship altogether. Jezebel maintained control over Ahab by ensuring he stayed passive and dependent on her decisions. In modern relationships, this can look like someone using fear to maintain power, manipulating you into silence or submission. So, set one clear boundary today to guard your heart and mind. Boundaries are essential for protecting yourself from manipulation. Identify one area where you feel pressured, compromised, or drained, and set a boundary to protect that space. This might mean limiting certain conversations, creating distance, or saying no when you feel manipulated. Establishing even a small boundary signals that you are taking back control of your emotional and spiritual well-being. Setting boundaries can feel intimidating, especially if the relationship has a long history of manipulation. However, as Proverbs 4 verse 23 teaches, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They are lines that protect your peace and align your actions with God's truth. God desires for you to live in freedom, not in fear, and boundaries are an act of faith that honors His will for your life. When you set a boundary, don't expect immediate change. Manipulators may resist or test your limits, but stay firm in your decision, knowing that God strengthens those who seek to live according to His truth. Pray for wisdom and courage to uphold the boundaries you set, trusting that each step toward health creates space for God's peace to take root. Setting boundaries is essential for breaking free from manipulation and aligning your relationships with God's truth. A single boundary, no matter how small, is a powerful step toward emotional and spiritual freedom. And how can you avoid toxic relationships? Avoiding toxic relationships requires intentional effort and discernment. Just as Jezebel's influence over Ahab slowly eroded his leadership and faith, unhealthy dynamics can sneak into our relationships if we are not vigilant. God desires for you to experience connections that uplift and encourage your walk with Him, not ones that drain your spirit or lead you away from His truth. Learning to avoid toxic relationships is not just about walking away. It's about aligning your heart with God's will and fostering healthy, life-giving connections. One of the most important ways to avoid toxic relationships is by seeking godly counsel. Sometimes, manipulation and unhealthy patterns are hard to recognize when you are in the middle of them. Talking with a trusted mentor, pastor, or spiritually mature friend provides clarity that you might not gain on your own. Proverbs 15 verse 22 reminds us, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. God uses wise counsel to guide us, revealing areas where relationships may be causing harm or leading us away from Him. When you seek counsel, be open and honest about your situation. Explain the dynamics you are experiencing, including moments that feel manipulative or controlling. Receiving input from someone outside the relationship can help you see patterns you might have overlooked. Godly counsel also provides encouragement to make necessary changes, whether that means setting stronger boundaries, adjusting the level of closeness, or walking away from a harmful connection. Making adjustments in relationships may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've grown accustomed to certain dynamics. However, God never asks you to remain in a relationship that compromises your faith, drains your peace, or leads you away from Him. Seeking wise counsel gives you the tools to make prayerful decisions that align with His truth, protecting both your heart and spiritual well-being. Try and seek out wise counsel from someone you trust and respect. Identify one person, a mentor, pastor, or mature friend, who can offer godly wisdom about your relationships. Reach out to them this week and have an open conversation about what you are experiencing. Ask for their perspective on whether the relationship is healthy and if they see any patterns of manipulation or control. Sometimes just having someone listen and pray with you can provide the clarity you need to move forward. Remember that seeking counsel is not a sign of weakness but an act of wisdom. God often speaks through trusted people in our lives, offering direction and encouragement when we feel stuck or uncertain. Be open to the guidance you receive, even if it challenges you to make changes. Each step toward healthier relationships allows more space for God's peace and presence to reign in your life. Seeking godly counsel provides the wisdom and clarity needed to avoid toxic relationships and align your life with God's truth. You don't have to navigate difficult relationships alone. God provides support through trusted advisors who can guide you toward health and peace. Choose to break free from harmful influences. It's never too late to break free from toxic dynamics and realign your relationships with God's truth. The story of Ahab and Jezebel shows us the destructive power of unchecked manipulation, but it also reminds us that change is possible when we seek God's wisdom. You don't have to remain stuck in cycles of control or guilt. God offers strength, peace, and freedom when you take intentional steps toward healthy connections. Breaking free from harmful influences might feel difficult, especially if the relationship has deep roots. But each boundary you set and every conversation you have in truth is an act of faith that invites God's peace into your life. Remember, God doesn't call you to navigate these situations alone. He offers guidance through His Word, through prayer, and through trusted mentors and friends. If this message encouraged you, subscribe to the channel for more content that equips you to navigate life with faith, wisdom, and peace. I also recommend watching our recent video. This will happen when God starts preparing you for something greater, just like breaking free from manipulation. Recognizing God's preparation requires courage and trust. In both cases, God's hand is working to move you out of the familiar and into something better, whether it's freeing you from toxic relationships or leading you into a new season of growth. Every step you take toward healthy relationships matters, no matter how small it seems. God's desire for you is to live in freedom, surrounded by connections that encourage your faith and align with His will. Trust Him to guide you, and take the first step today toward a life filled with His peace.